A Defence of General Funston by Mark Twain. 1. February 22nd. Today is the great birthday, and it was observed so widely in the earth that differences in longitudinal time made curious work with some of the cabled testimonies of respect paid to the sublime name which the date calls up in our minds. 4. Although they were all being offered at about the same hour, several of them were yesterday to us and several were tomorrow. There was a reference in the papers to General Funston. Neither Washington nor Funston was made in a day. It took a long time to accumulate the materials. In each case, the basis or moral skeleton of the man was inborn disposition, a thing which is as permanent as rock, and never undergoes any actual and genuine change between cradle and grave. In each case, the moral flesh bulk, that is to say, character, was built and shaped around the skeleton by training, association, and circumstances. Given a crooked disposition skeleton, no power nor influence in the earth can mold a permanently shapely form around it. Training, association, and circumstances can truss it, and brace it, and prop it, and strain it, and crowd it into an artificial shapeliness that can endure till the end, deceiving not only the spectator but the man himself. But there is nothing there but artificiality, and if at any time the props and trusses chance to be removed, the form will collapse into its proper and native crookedness. Washington did not create the basic skeleton, disposition, that was in him. It was born there, and the merit of its perfection was not his. It and only it moved him to seek and prefer associations which were contenting to its spirit, to welcome influences which pleased it and satisfied it, and to repel or be indifferent to influences which were not to its taste. Moment by moment, day by day, year by year, it stood in the ceaseless sweep of minute influences, automatically arresting and retaining, like a magnet of mercury, all dust particles of gold that came, and with automatic scorn, repelling certain dust particles of trash, and, with his automatic indifference, allowing the rest of that base kinship to go by unnoticed. It had a native affinity for all influences fine and great, and gave them hospitable welcome and permanent shelter. It had a native aversion for all influences mean and gross, and passed them on. It chose its subjects' associations for him. It chose his influences for him. It chose his ideals for him. And, out of its patiently gathered materials, it built and shaped his golden character. And we give him the credit. We give God credit and praise for being all-wise and all-powerful, but that is quite another matter. No exterior contributor, no birth commission, conferred these possessions upon him. He did it himself. But Washington's disposition was born in him. He did not create it. It was the architect of his character. His character was the architect of his achievements. If my disposition had been born in him and his in me, the map of history would have been changed. It is our privilege to admire the splendor of the sun, and the beauty of the rainbow, and the character of Washington. But there is no occasion to praise them for these qualities, since they did not create the source whence the qualities sprang: the sun's fires, the light upon the falling raindrops, the sane and clean and benignant disposition born to the father of his country. Is there a value, then, in having a Washington, since we may not concede to him personal merit for what he was and did? Necessarily, there is a value so immense that it defies all estimate. Acceptable outside influences were the materials out of which Washington's native disposition built Washington's character and fitted him for his achievements. Suppose there hadn't been any. Suppose he had been born and reared in a pirate's cave. The acceptable materials would have been lacking. The Washingtonian character would not have been built. Fortunately for us and for the world and for future ages and peoples, he was born where the sort of influences and associations acceptable to his disposition were findable, where the building of his character at its best and highest was possible, and where the accident of favorable circumstances was present to furnish it a conspicuous field for the full exercise and exhibition of its commanding capabilities. Did Washington's great value, then, lie in what he accomplished? No, that was only a minor value. His major value, his vast value, his immeasurable value to us and to the world and to future ages and peoples, lies in his permanent and sky-reaching conspicuousness as an influence. We are made, brick by brick, of influences, patiently built up around the framework of our born dispositions. It is the sole process of construction. There is no other. Every man and woman and child is an influence, a daily and hourly influence which never ceases from work and never ceases from affecting for good or evil the characters about it, some contributing gold dust, some contributing trash dust, but in either case helping on the building and never stopping to rest. O Washington, standing upon the world's utmost summit, eternally visible, eternally clothed in light, a serene, inspiring, heartening example and admonition, is an influence which raises the level of character in all receptive men and peoples, alien and domestic. And the term of its gracious work is not measurable by fleeting generations, but only by the lingering march of the centuries. O Washington, standing upon the world's utmost summit, eternally visible, eternally clothed in light, a serene, inspiring, heartening example and admonition, is an influence which raises the level of character in all receptive men and peoples, alien and domestic. And the term of its gracious work is not measurable by fleeting generations, but only by the lingering march of the centuries. Washington was more and greater than the father of a nation. He was the father of its patriotism at its loftiest and best, and so powerful was the influence which he left behind him, that golden patriotism remained undimmed and unsullied for 100 years, lacking one. And so fundamentally right-hearted are our people by grace of that long and ennobling teaching, that today, already, they are facing back for home. They are laying aside their foreign-born and foreign-bred, imported patriotism and resuming that which Washington gave to their fathers, which is American and the only American, which lasted 99 years and is good for 1,000,000 more. Doubt that we did right by the Filipinos is rising steadily higher and higher in the nation's breast. Conviction will follow doubt. The nation will speak. Its will is law. There is no other sovereign on this soil, and in that day we shall right such unfairnesses as we have done. We shall let go our obsequious hold on the rear skirts of the sceptered land thieves of Europe, and be what we were before, a real world power, and the chiefest of them all, by right of the only clean hands in Christendom, the only hands guiltless of the sordid plunder of any helpless people's stolen liberties, hands recleansed in the patriotism of Washington, and once more fit to touch the hem of the revered shade's garment and stand in its presence unashamed. It was Washington's influence that made Lincoln and all other real patriots the Republic has known. It was Washington's influence that made the soldiers who saved the Union. And that influence will save us always and bring us back to the fold when we stray. And so, when a Washington is given us, or a Lincoln, or a Grant, what should we do? Knowing, as we do, that a conspicuous influence for good is worth more than 1,000,000,000 obscure ones, without doubt the logic of it is that we should highly value it, and make a vestal flame of it, and keep it briskly burning in every way we can in the nursery, in the school, in the college, in the pulpit, in the newspaper, even in Congress, if such a thing were possible. The proper inborn disposition was required to start a Washington. The acceptable influences and circumstances and a large field were required to develop and complete him. The same with Funston. 2. The war was over, end of 1900. A month later, the mountain refuge of the defeated and hunted, and now powerless but not yet hopeless, Filipino chief was discovered. His army was gone, his republic extinguished, his ablest statesmen deported, his generals all in their graves or prisoners of war. The memory of his worthy dream had entered upon a historic life, to be an inspiration to less unfortunate patriots in other centuries. The dream itself was dead beyond resurrection, though he could not believe it. Now came his capture. An admiring author, Aguinaldo, by Edwin Wildman, Lothrop Publishing Company, Boston, shall tell us about it. His account can be trusted, for it is correctly synopsized from General Funston's own voluntary confession made by him at the time. The italics are mine. It was not until February 1901 that his actual hiding place was discovered. The clue was in the shape of a letter from Aguinaldo commanding his cousin, Baldormero Aguinaldo, to send him 400 armed men, the bearer to act as a guide to the same. The order was in cipher, but among other effects captured at various times a copy of the insurgent cipher was found. The insurgent courier was convinced of the error of his ways, though by exactly what means, history does not reveal, and offered to lead the way to Aguinaldo's place of hiding. Here was an opportunity that suggested an adventure equal to anything in penny-awful fiction. It was just the kind of a daredevil exploit that appealed to the romantic Funston. It was something out of the ordinary for a brigadier general to leave his command and turn into a scout, but Funston was irresistible. He formulated a scheme and asked General MacArthur's permission. It was impossible to refuse the daring adventurer, the hero of the Rio Grande, anything. So Funston set to work, imitating the peculiar handwriting of Lacuna, the insurgent officer to whom Aguinaldo's communication referred. Some little time previous to the capture of the Tagalog courier, several of Lacuna's letters were found, together with Aguinaldo's cipher code. Having perfected Lacuna's signature, Funston wrote 2 letters on February 24th and 28th, acknowledging Aguinaldo's communication and informing him that he, Lacuna, was sending him a few of the best soldiers in his command. Added to this neat forgery, General Funston dictated a letter which was written by an ex-insurgent attached to his command, telling Aguinaldo that the relief force had surprised and captured a detachment of Americans, taking 5 prisoners whom they were bringing to him because of their importance. This ruse was employed to explain the presence of the 5 Americans: General Funston, Captain Hazard, Captain Newton, Lieutenant Hazard, and General Funston's aide, Lieutenant Kitchell, who were to accompany the expedition. 78 Maccabees, hereditary enemies of the Tagalogs, were chosen by Funston to form the body of the command. These fearless and hardy natives fell into the scheme with a vengeance. 3 Tagalogs and 1 Spaniard were also invited. The Maccabees were fitted out in cast-off insurgent uniforms, and the Americans donned field-worn uniforms of privates. 3 days' rations were provided, and each man was given a rifle. The Vicksburg was chosen to take the daring impostors to some spot on the east coast near Palanan, where Aguinaldo was in hiding. Arriving off the coast at Casignan, some distance from the insurgent hidden capital, the party was landed. 3 Maccabees, who spoke Tagalog fluently, were sent into the town to notify the natives that they were bringing additional forces and important American prisoners to Aguinaldo, and request of the local authorities guides and assistance. The insurgent president readily consented, and the little party, after refreshing themselves and exhibiting their prisoners, started over the 90-mile trail to Palanan, a mountain retreat on the coast of the Isabela province. Over the stony declivities and through the thick jungle, across bridgeless streams and up narrow passes, the footsore and bone-racked adventurers tramped until their food was exhausted, and they were too weak to move, though but 8 miles from Aguinaldo's rendezvous. A messenger was sent forward to inform Aguinaldo of their position and to beg for food. The rebel chieftain promptly replied by dispatching rice and a letter to the officer in command, instructing him to treat the American prisoners well, but to leave them outside the town. What better condition could the ingenious Funston have himself dictated? On the 23rd of March, the party reached Palanan. Aguinaldo sent out 11 men to take charge of the American prisoners, but Funston and his associates succeeded in dodging them and scattering themselves in the jungle until they passed on to meet the Americans whom the insurgents were notified were left behind. Immediately joining his command, Funston ordered his little band of daredevils to march boldly into the town and present themselves to Aguinaldo. At the insurgent headquarters, they were received by Aguinaldo's bodyguard, dressed in blue drill uniforms and white hats, drawn up in military form. The spokesman so completely hoodwinked Aguinaldo that he did not suspect the ruse. In the meantime, the Maccabees maneuvered around into advantageous positions, directed by the Spaniard, until all were in readiness. Then he shouted, "Maccabees, now is your turn," whereupon they emptied their rifles into Aguinaldo's bodyguard. The Americans joined in the skirmish, and 2 of Aguinaldo's staff were wounded, but escaped, the treasurer of the revolutionary government surrendering. The rest of the Filipino officers got away. Aguinaldo accepted his capture with resignation, though greatly in fear of the vengeance of the Maccabees. But General Funston's assurance of his personal safety set his mind easy on that point, and he calmed down and discussed the situation. He was greatly cast down at his capture, and asserted that by no other means would he have been taken alive, an admission which added all the more to Funston's achievement, for Aguinaldo's was a difficult and desperate case, and demanded extraordinary methods. Some of the customs of war are not pleasant to the civilian, but ages upon ages of training have reconciled us to them as being justifiable, and we accept them and make no demur, even when they give us an extra twinge. Every detail of Funston's scheme but one has been employed in war in the past and stands acquitted of blame by history. By the custom of war, it is permissible, in the interest of an enterprise like the one under consideration, for a brigadier general, if he be of the sort that can so choose, to persuade or bribe a courier to betray his trust, to remove the badges of his honorable rank and disguise himself, to lie, to practice treachery, to forge, to associate with himself persons properly fitted by training and instinct for the work, to accept of courteous welcome, and assassinate the welcomers while there. Hands are still warm from the friendly handshake. By the custom of war, all these things are innocent, none of them is blameworthy, all of them are justifiable. None of them is new, all of them have been done before, although not by a brigadier general. But there is one detail which is new, absolutely new. It has never been resorted to before in any age of the world, in any country, among any people, savage or civilized. It was the one meant by Aguinaldo when he said that, by no other means, would he have been taken alive. When a man is exhausted by hunger to the point where he is too weak to move, he has a right to make supplication to his enemy to save his failing life. But if he takes so much as one taste of that food which is holy, by the precept of all ages and all nations, he is barred from lifting his hand against that enemy for that time. It was left to a brigadier general of volunteers in the American army to put shame upon a custom which even the degraded Spanish friars had respected. We promoted him for it. Our unsuspecting president was in the act of taking his murderer by the hand when the man shot him down. The amazed world dwelt upon that damning fact, brooded over it, discussed it, blushed for it, said it put a blot and a shame upon our race. Yet, bad as he was, he had not dying of starvation begged food of the president to strengthen his failing forces for his treacherous work. He did not proceed against the life of a benefactor who had just saved his own. April 14th. I have been absent several weeks in the West Indies. I will now resume this defense. It seems to me that General Funston's appreciation of the capture needs editing. It seems to me that, in his after-dinner speeches, he spreads out the heroisms of it. I say it with deference and subject to correction with an almost too generous hand. He is a brave man. His dearest enemy will cordially grant him that credit. For his sake, it is a pity that somewhat of that quality was not needed in the episode under consideration. That he would have furnished it, no one doubts. But, by his own showing, he ran but one danger, that of starving. He and his party were well disguised, in dishonored uniforms, American and insurgent. They greatly outnumbered Aguinaldo's guard, 89 to 48. Funston's Lotus Club confession. By his forgeries and falsehoods he had lulled suspicion to sleep. His coming was expected, his way was prepared. His course was through a solitude, unfriendly interruption was unlikely. His party were well armed. They would catch their prey with welcoming smiles in their faces, and with hospitable hands extended for the friendly shake. Nothing would be necessary but to shoot these people down. That is what they did. It was hospitality repaid in a brand new, up-to-date, modern civilization fashion, and would be admired by many. The spokesman so completely hoodwinked Aguinaldo that he did not suspect the ruse. In the meantime, the Maccabees maneuvered around into advantageous positions, directed by the Spaniard, until all were in readiness. Then he shouted, "Maccabees, now is your turn," whereupon they emptied their rifles into Aguinaldo's bodyguard. From Wildman's book, already quoted, the utter completeness of the surprise, the total absence of suspicion which had been secured by the forgeries and falsehoods, is best brought out in Funston's humorous account of the episode in one of his rollicking speeches, the one he thought the president said he wanted to see republished, though it turned out that this was only a dream. Dream of a reporter, the general says. The Maccabees fired on those men and 2 fell dead. The others retreated, firing as they ran. And I might say here that they retreated with such great alacrity and enthusiasm that they dropped 18 rifles and 1,000 rounds of ammunition. Sigismondo rushed back into the house, pulled his revolver, and told the insurgent officers to surrender. They all threw up their hands except Villia, Aguinaldo's chief of staff. He had on one of those new-fangled Mauser revolvers and he wanted to try it. But before he had the Mauser out of its scabbard, he was shot twice. Sigismondo was a pretty fair marksman himself. Alhambra was shot in the face. He jumped out of the window. The house, by the way, stood on the bank of the river. He went out of the window and went clear down into the river, the water being 25 feet below the bank. He escaped, swam across the river and got away, and surrendered 5 months afterwards. Villia, shot in the shoulder, followed him out of the window and into the river, but the Maccabees saw him and ran down to the river bank, and they waded in and fished him out and kicked him all the way up the bank and asked him how he liked it. Laughter. While it is true that the daredevils were not in danger upon this occasion, they were in awful peril at one time. In peril of a death so awful that swift extinction by bullet, by the axe, by the sword, by the rope, by drowning, by fire, is a kindly mercy contrasted with it. A death so awful that it holds its place unchallenged as the supremest of human agonies, death by starvation. Aguinaldo saved them from that. These being the facts, we come now to the question, is Funston to blame? I think not. And for that reason I think too much is being made of this matter. He did not make his own disposition, it was born with him. It chose his ideals for him. He did not choose them. It chose the kind of society it liked, the kind of comrades it preferred, and imposed them upon him, rejecting the other kinds. He could not help this. It admired everything that Washington did not admire, and hospitably received and coddled everything that Washington would have turned out of doors, but it, and it only, was to blame, not Funston. His it took as naturally to moral slag as Washington's took to moral gold, but only it was to blame, not Funston. Its moral sense, if it had any, was colorblind, but this was no fault of Funston's, and he is not chargeable with the results. It had a native predilection for unsavory conduct, but it would be in the last degree unfair to hold Funston to blame for the outcome of his infirmity, as clearly unfair as it would be to blame him because his conscience leaked out through one of his pores when he was little a thing which he could not help, and he couldn't have raised it, anyway. It was able to say to an enemy, "Have pity on me, I am starving. I am too weak to move, give me food. I am your friend, I am your fellow patriot, your fellow Filipino, and am fighting for our dear country's liberties, like you have pity, give me food, save my life, there is no other help." And it was able to refresh and restore its marionette with the food, and then shoot down the giver of it while his hand was stretched out in welcome like the president's. Yet if blame there was, and guilt, and treachery, and baseness, they are not Funston's, but only its. It has the noble gift of humor, and can make a banquet almost die with laughter when it has a funny incident to tell about. This one will bear reading again and over again. In fact, the Maccabees fired on those men and 2 fell dead. The others retreated, firing as they ran. And I might say here that they retreated with such alacrity and enthusiasm that they dropped 18 rifles and 1,000 rounds of ammunition. Sigismondo rushed back into the house, pulled his revolver, and told the insurgent officers to surrender. They all threw up their hands except Villia, Aguinaldo's chief of staff. He had on one of those new-fangled Mauser revolvers and he wanted to try it. But before he had the Mauser out of its scabbard, he was shot twice. Sigismondo was a pretty fair marksman himself. Alhambra was shot in the face. He jumped out of the window. The house, by the way, stood on the bank of the river. He went out of the window and went clear down into the river, the water being 25 feet below the bank. He escaped, swam across the river and got away, and surrendered 5 months afterwards. Villia, shot in the shoulder, followed him out of the window and into the river, but the Maccabees saw him and ran down to the river bank, and they waded in and fished him out and kicked him all the way up the bank and asked him how he liked it. Laughter. This was a wounded man. But it is only it that is speaking, not Funston. With youthful glee it can see sink down in death the simple creatures who had answered its fainting prayer for food, and without remorse it can note the reproachful look in their dimming eyes. But in fairness we must remember that this is only it, not Funston. By proxy, in the person of its born servant, it can do its strange work and practice its ingratitudes and amazing treacheries, while wearing the uniform of the American soldier and marching under the authority of the American flag. And it not Funston comes home now, to teach us children what patriotism is. Surely it ought to know. It is plain to me, and I think it ought to be plain to all, that Funston is not in any way to blame for the things he has done, does, thinks, and says. Now then, we have Funston. He has happened, and is on our hands. The question is, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to meet the emergency? We have seen what happened in Washington's case. He became a colossal example, an example to the whole world and for all time, because his name and deeds went everywhere and inspired, as they still inspire, and will always inspire, admiration and compel emulation. Then the thing for the world to do in the present case is to turn the gilt front of Funston's evil notoriety to the rear and expose the back aspect of it, the right and black aspect of it, to the youth of the land. Otherwise he will become an example and a boy admiration, and will most sorrowfully and grotesquely bring his breed of patriotism into competition with Washington's. This competition has already begun, in fact. Some may not believe it, but it is nevertheless true that there are now public school teachers and superintendents who are holding up Funston as a model hero and patriot in the schools. If this Funstonian boom continues, Funstonism will presently affect the army. In fact, this has already happened. There are weak-headed and weak-principled officers in all armies, and these are always ready to imitate successful notoriety-breeding methods, let them be good or bad. The fact that Funston has achieved notoriety by paralyzing the universe with a fresh and hideous idea is sufficient for this kind. They will call that hand if they can, and go it one better when the chance offers. Funston's example has bred many imitators and many ghastly additions to our history. The torturing of Filipinos by the awful water cure, for instance, to make them confess what? Truth or lies? How can one know which it is they are telling? For under unendurable pain a man confesses anything that is required of him, true or false, and his evidence is worthless. Yet upon such evidence American officers have actually, but you know about those atrocities which the War Office has been hiding a year or two, and about General Smith's now world-celebrated order of massacre thus summarized by the press from Major Waller's testimony. Kill and burn. This is no time to take prisoners. The more you kill and burn, the better. Kill all above the age of 10, make Samar a howling wilderness. You see what Funston's example has produced, just in this little while, even before he produced the example. It has advanced our civilization ever so far fully, as far as Europe advanced it in China. Also, no doubt, it was Funston's example that made us, in England, copy Whaler's reconcentrato horror after the pair of us, with our Sunday school smirk on and our goody-goody noses upturned toward heaven, had been calling him a fiend. And the fearful earthquake out there in Krakatoa, that destroyed the island and killed 2 million people. No, that could not have been Funston's example. I remember now, he was not born then. However, for all these things I blame only his it, not him. In conclusion, I have defended him as well as I could, and indeed I have found it quite easy, and have removed prejudice from him and rehabilitated him in the public esteem and regard, I think. I was not able to do anything for his it being out of my jurisdiction and out of Funston's and everybody's. As I have shown, Funston is not to blame for his fearful deed, and if I tried, I might also show that he is not to blame for our still holding in bondage the man he captured by unlawful means, and who is not any more rightfully our prisoner and spoil than he would be if he were stolen money. He is entitled to his freedom. If he were a king of a great power, or an ex-president of our republic, instead of an ex-president of a destroyed and abolished little republic, civilization, with a large C, would criticize and complain until he got it. Mark Twain. P.S. April 16th. The president is speaking up, this morning, just as this goes to the printer, and there is no uncertain sound about the note. It is the speech and spirit of a president of a people, not of a party, and we all like it, traitors and all. I think I may speak for the other traitors, for I am sure they feel as I do about it. I will explain that we get our title from the Funstonian patriots, free of charge. They are always doing us little compliments like that. They are just born flatterers, those boys. A Curious Pleasure Excursion by Mark Twain, published at the time of the Comet Scare in the summer of 1874. We have received the following advertisement, but inasmuch as it concerns a matter of deep and general interest, we feel fully justified in inserting it in our reading columns. We are confident that our conduct in this regard needs only explanation, not apology. Ed. N. Y. Herald. Advertisement. This is to inform the public that in connection with Mr. Barnum, I have leased the Comet for a term of years, and I desire also to solicit the public patronage in favor of a beneficial enterprise which we have in view. We propose to fit up comfortable and even luxurious accommodations in the Comet for as many persons as will honor us with their patronage, and make an extended excursion among the heavenly bodies. We shall prepare 1,000,000 staterooms in the tail of the Comet, with hot and cold water, gas, looking-glass, parachute, umbrella, etc. in each, and shall construct more if we meet with a sufficiently generous encouragement. We shall have billiard rooms, card rooms, music rooms, bowling alleys, and many spacious theaters and free libraries. And on the main deck we propose to have a driving park, with upward of 100,000 miles of roadway in it. We shall publish daily newspapers also. Departure of the Comet. The Comet will leave New York at 10 p.m. on the 20th INST, and therefore it will be desirable that the passengers be on board by 8 at the latest, to avoid confusion in getting underway. It is not known whether passports will be necessary or not, but it is deemed best that passengers provide them, and so guard against all contingencies. No dogs will be allowed on board. This rule has been made in deference to the existing state of feeling regarding these animals, and will be strictly adhered to. The safety of the passengers will in all ways be jealously looked to. A substantial iron railing will be put up all around the Comet, and no one will be allowed to go to the edge and look over unless accompanied by either my partner or myself. The postal service will be of the completest character. Of course, the telegraph, and the telegraph only, will be employed. Consequently, friends occupying state rooms 20 million and even 30 million miles apart will be able to send a message and receive a reply inside of 11 days. Night messages will be half-rate. The whole of this vast postal system will be under the personal superintendence of Mr. Hale of Maine. Meals served at all hours. Meals served in staterooms charged extra. Hostility is not apprehended from any great planet, but we have thought it best to err on the safe side, and therefore have provided a proper number of mortars, siege guns, and boarding pikes. History shows that small, isolated communities, such as the people of remote islands, are prone to be hostile to strangers, and so the same may be the case with the inhabitants of stars of the 10th or 20th magnitude. We shall in no case wantonly offend the people of any star, but shall treat all alike with urbanity and kindliness, never conducting ourselves toward an asteroid after a fashion which we could not venture to assume toward Jupiter or Saturn. I repeat that we shall not wantonly offend any star, but at the same time we shall promptly resent any injury that may be done us, or any insolence offered us, by parties or governments residing in any star in the firmament. Although averse to the shedding of blood, we shall still hold this course rigidly and fearlessly, not only toward single stars, but toward constellations. We shall hope to leave a good impression of America behind us in every nation we visit, from Venus to Uranus. And, at all events, if we cannot inspire love, we shall at least compel respect for our country wherever we go. We shall take with us, free of charge, a great force of missionaries, and shed the true light upon all the celestial orbs which, physically aglow, are yet morally in darkness. Sunday schools will be established wherever practicable. Compulsory education will also be introduced. The Comet will visit Mars first, and proceed to Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn. Parties connected with the government of the District of Columbia and with the former city government of New York, who may desire to inspect the rings, will be allowed time in every facility. Every star of prominent magnitude will be visited, and time allowed for excursions to points of interest inland. The Dog Star has been stricken from the program. Much time will be spent in the Great Bear, and indeed, in every constellation of importance. So, also, with the Sun and Moon and the Milky Way, otherwise the Gulf Stream of the skies. Clothing suitable for wear in the sun should be provided. Our program has been so arranged that we shall seldom go more than 100 million of miles at a time without stopping at some star. This will necessarily make the stoppages frequent and preserve the interest of the tourist. Baggage checked through to any point on the route. Parties desiring to make only a part of the proposed tour, and thus save expense, may stop over at any star they choose and wait for the return voyage. After visiting all the most celebrated stars and constellations in our system and personally, inspecting the remotest sparks that even the most powerful telescope can now detect in the firmament, we shall proceed with good heart upon
Un stupendous voyage.
of discovery among the countless whirling worlds that make turmoil in the mighty wastes of space that stretch their solemn solitudes, their unimaginable vastness billions upon billions of miles away beyond the farthest verge of telescopic vision, till by comparison the little sparkling vault we use to gaze at on Earth shall seem like a remembered phosphorescent flash of spangles which some tropical voyager's prow stirred into life for a single instant, and which 10,000 miles of phosphorescent seas and tedious lapse of time had since diminished to an incident utterly trivial in his recollection. Children occupying seats at the first table will be charged full fare, first-class fare. From the Earth to Uranus, including visits to the Sun and Moon and all the principal planets on the route, will be charged at the low rate of $2 for every 50 million miles of actual travel. A great reduction will be made where parties wish to make the round trip. This comet is new and in thorough repair and is now on her first voyage. She is confessedly the fastest on the line. She makes 20 million miles a day with her present facilities. But with a picked American crew and good weather, we are confident we can get 40 million out of her. Still, we shall never push her to a dangerous speed, and we shall rigidly prohibit racing with other comets. Passengers desiring to diverge at any point or return will be transferred to other comets. We make close connections at all principal points with all reliable lines. Safety can be depended upon. It is not to be denied that the heavens are infested with old ramshackle comets that have not been inspected or overhauled in 10,000 years, and which ought long ago to have been destroyed or turned into hail barges. But with these we have no connection whatever. Steerage passengers not allowed abaft the main hatch. Complimentary round-trip tickets have been tendered to General Butler, Mr. Shepard, Mr. Richardson, and other eminent gentlemen, whose public services have entitled them to the rest and relaxation of a voyage of this kind. Parties desiring to make the round trip will have extra accommodation. The entire voyage will be completed, and the passengers landed in New York again on the 14th of December, 1991. This is, at least, 40 years quicker than any other comet can do it in. Nearly all the back pay members contemplate making the round trip with us in case their constituents will allow them a holiday. Every harmless amusement will be allowed on board, but no pools permitted on the run of the comet, no gambling of any kind. All fixed stars will be respected by us, but such stars as seem to need fixing we shall fix. If it makes trouble, we shall be sorry, but firm. Mr. Kaggia having leased his comet to us, she will no longer be called by his name, but by my partners. N.B. Passengers by paying double fare will be entitled to a share in all the new stars, suns, moons, comets, meteors, and magazines of thunder and lightning we may discover. Patent medicine people will take notice that we carry bulletin boards and a paintbrush along for use in the constellations, and are open to terms. Cremationists are reminded that we are going straight to some hot places, are open to terms. To other parties our enterprise is a pleasure excursion, but individually we mean business. We shall fly our comet for all it is worth. For further particulars, or for freight or passage, apply on board, or to my partner, but not to me, since I do not take charge of the comet until she is underway. It is necessary, at a time like this, that my mind should not be burdened with small business details. Mark Twain.